All right, so here's a little bit. I had to cut this off last week because if you remember what we were talking about last week. Anybody remember? We've already covered about Abraham and Sarah. We've already covered about this here. I added about these people that the Lord visited. We talked about that. And then we were talking about Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. And last week we were talking about who? Okay, Isaac, we talked about him. His name came up, but who was the key? I know it's been a week. I know it's been over 24 hours. I know it's been over an hour since we said this. Who we talked about last week? Who was the key person we talked about last week? I think it was Jacob. Jacob was the key issue we dealt with last week. We're talking about Jacob again. We're finishing that. We weren't able to finish the lesson last week, so we're picking up on the lesson. Lord willing, get through Jacob and get through Joseph. There's a lot here in a short period of time. Of course, I had to condense this as well, trying to cover a lot here for you. You do have a handout. If you want that handout, it gives you a little bit of a timeline. You'll see that in that. It's in this presentation as we go through. So that's why there's a little bit more slides in this, involved in this, using it, just referring to the timeline. I will not go through it in depth or anything. But I think for me, and not about for you, it helps you understand relationship of the people and their time and who's who, and a little bit understanding there. I think helps in some of that. So today, back, the opening we had last week, which we brought out, is in God's visitation. The Old Testament explains how God made Abraham's descendants into a great nation. And we talked about the importance of the Old Testament. It is important to understand the Old Testament and why it's important. But it does explain about how Abraham's descendants became a great nation. And we'll talk about that here today as well. How he blessed Abraham's descendants and how he blessed those who blessed Israel and cursed those who cursed Israel as well. And you'll see that, the blessings. In the passing of the Abrahamic covenant and to his sons and to his descendants as well. We've dealt with these things. It's what we dealt with previously. We dealt with his descendants. We dealt with Isaac, his coming of his brides. What's so important about the bride for Isaac? Anybody remember? You know the event. You know what happened. Why is it so important? I know I ask questions on a Sunday morning and you don't have a cup of coffee in your hand. I understand that. Yes, Terry? I'm sorry?
Because Jesus will be her descendant?
Correct. And what was so significant about finding this bride for Isaac?
Isaac sent his servant to look for this, and everything just played out just perfect, like it had been pre-planned.
When the servant went to go find this bride, right? And how God worked it all out. How he prayed, how the servant prayed, and how Rebekah came available at that time, and how just everything God put together all of this. But what's important about her, she was not a Canaanite. Remember that. That was so important that she would not be a Canaanite, okay, for that. The birth of the twins, what's so important about that? The birth of the twins are who? Who are the twins? Jacob and Esau. And they were so different. They were different physically and they were different characterized as characters. Their character backgrounds was just different between them two. But also there's something else about this got us down to the next part about Jacob here. The division, the favorites. What was the division? Division was between what? Between Jacob and Esau, but also with their parents as well, right? There was favoritism going there, right? And also you realize when we talk about the birthright, what's so important about the birthright? The key for the inheritance, right? Who had the birthright? And of course, we know what happened as far as, Jacob and Esau, where Esau asked for food, and of course Jacob said, hey, nothing's free, basically. What are you going to give me for it? Give me your birthright. He gave up his birthright, sold his birthright for food. And so the deception was what? The deception was involving who? 4 characters were involved in this. Right? Rebekah worked along with Isaac to deceive Jacob, which also impacted Esau, did it not? All of that. So today we're going to pick up after that. Now the blessing has been given. Isaac has given his blessing to who? He's given it to Jacob as the birthright. By deception, of course, it was given to him. And so Esau finds out, and Esau's upset. So what is Esau's plan now with Jacob? Hey, we're brothers. Let's kiss, make up, we'll shake hands. We're fine. Let's go on. He wants to kill him, don't he? That's the thought. Wants to kill him. So with that in mind, we're going to pick up here where Jacob has to flee. Of course, he's fleeing to go to Haran. So in part of this, and I think this is a good statement here, the flight from Esau gained a new incentive when Jacob was commissioned by his parents to find himself a wife, of course, in the land where they came from. That's how they worded it. How it was worded is that, hey, Jacob, Esau, Jacob needs to go find him a wife. Not that he needs to go run for his life and get away from his brothers trying to kill him, but he needs to go find a wife. So Isaac sends him off to there. So it gives a different perspective on the commission, I guess, to go find a wife. But even though he's fleeing for his life, is he not? That's what he's doing. He's really fleeing from his brothers' hatred for him. Now, let me ask you this. We talked about it a little bit briefly, and you'll see here, but with Rebekah's, what was her thought that, about Jacob going? Be gone for a short period of time, right? The bottom line of this, he was longer than that, a few days or a few months. For 20 years he was gone, and she never saw him again as far as we know. She never saw him after that. So if you turn, if we're in chapter 28, I got too far, 28. So in chapter 28, Genesis 28, where he gives the blessing, about giving him the direction to go as far as in chapter 28, verse 1, we just mentioned that briefly about charging him not to find a daughter of the Canaanites, but to go back to their homeland to find a daughter. But if you go down there in verse 10, and Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night, because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of the place and put them for his pillows, and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder sent up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land wherein thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth. And thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee. It will keep thee in all places whither thou goest. It will bring thee again unto this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. And Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid and said, how dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. And Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had put for his pillows and set it up for a pillar and poured oil upon the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. But the name of the city was called Luz after the first. So he renamed this place Bethel. And that's important here because that shows up later on about this place called Bethel for him. And if you know in John chapter, I didn't write this down, but John chapter 1 and verse 51, if you want to see that. John chapter 1 in verse 51, what the Lord said. Well, let's go to verse 49. And Nathanael answered and said unto him, Rabbi, thou art the Son of God, and thou art the King of Israel. And Jesus answered and said unto him, because I said unto thee, I saw thee under the fig tree, believest thou? Thou shalt see greater things than these. And he said unto him, verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter you shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Isn't that interesting that what Jacob saw then, and the Lord talks about it here in the book of John as well. So with Jacob goes to Haran. Okay, so he falls in love with a young lady there, of course. And while he's there, he falls in love with who? Rachel. And he serves Laban, his uncle, for 7 years. Now, if you have that timeline thing I handed you, you'll see that here. It'll show up later on when we talk about it. But you'll see that timeline there, that he served 7 years for her. And because Jacob was not above doing wrong himself, but he was also done wrong as well, as we all know. In chapter 29, where verse 16, if you'll go, in verse 15, and Laban said unto Jacob, because thou art my brother, shouldest thou, Genesis 29, verse 15, because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for thought? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel, and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to thee, than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed like unto him but a few days, for the love he had for her. Who laid out the stipulation? Who laid out the stipulation about serving? Laban asked for what? Maybe I'm not asking the right question. Laban asked, what do you say here? Serve me. Therefore, serve me for naught. Tell me, what shall thy wages be? You're going to serve me, but how? What I'm trying to get to, wasn't it Jacob who laid out, I will serve 7 years for her? That's a pretty strong commitment there for 7 years, isn't it? For somebody. Of course, he serves the 7 years, and as you see, and Jacob said, and he served 7 years, verse 20, and Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had for her. And Jacob said unto Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled that I may go in to her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah, Zeplah, his maid, for a handmaid. And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah, and he said to Laban, what is this thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore hast thou beguiled me? And Laban said, it must not be done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. And Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, and he gave her Rachel, his daughter, to wife as well also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her maid. And he went in also unto Rachel. He loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet another 7 years. Say to serve 7 more years. If you notice here, the notes, the bullets I put up here for you, Jacob was receiving retribution for his own deceit. Did he not deceive his father? He deceived his own father. And he also got deceived, did he not, as well? God was working in Jacob's life to mold him spiritually, but God also promised to bless Jacob in chapter 28, verse 15. God was working out his eternal plan, this bullet here that you see there, his eternal plan by creating the nation of Israel through which to bring the law, the scriptures, and Christ, the last Adam. He's there for 12 years. He's there for 20 years, Laban is. He serves for 7 years, serves another 7 years, and stays another 6 years. As you see, we're going to jump over this a little bit. How he serves for 6 years for possessions, of course. Now, if you know about the trickery he did there, but he also gained what? Of the goats and all that and the sheep. What did he do? He gave up the weak ones to Laban's group, and he kept the stronger ones. And of course, it caught on after a while that, what he was doing to them. And of course, then he had to flee. He fled from there. But also there, he had his children. I don't go through the whole chapter. That's why I gave you that. There's on the handout tells you about his children that were born at that time. Of course, in chapter, if you look in chapter, we're down there, chapter 29, I'm jumping a little bit here, but chapter 29 in verse 31, and when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren, and Leah conceived and bare a son and called his name Reuben, and goes on from there talking about the sons that are born. Sons that are born to Leah, they are born to her handmaid, to Rachel, and then to her handmaid, and how they had children during that time they were in Haran. This really expands the nation Israel in a way, having this many children there of all this time taking place here, and how the Lord blessed them. I'm not going to go through all that whole chapter there about each one of these names that were given, who was born to who. You got that handout that I gave you, it helps you to see that. The handout I gave you last week, I think, shows the hereditary breakdown of that. But it's important to see that in Haran for 20 years, the expansion of the nation of Israel just by those leaders, I guess you want to call it, because eventually they're going to be heads of tribes is what they're going to be, of course, except Levi is going to be, you'll see that Levi will be the head of the priest as well. Here's the handout I think I handed you last week, the breakdown here showing that who was born to who and what verse it was referenced to in the scriptures there. That's the handout I gave you last week to show you that. Benjamin was not born in Haran. He was born later when they were in what's called Bethlehem at the time. But go to chapter 31. We're jumping over a little bit more, trying to cover a lot of territory, trying to get to chapter 50 by the end of this lesson this morning, Lord willing. So chapter 31, you have here the return. So when Jacob fled Haran with his families and possessions to return to the promised land, he had these encounters. These were the encounters that he had coming back to the land. He had great possession, he had great family, a large family, and great possessions to go back to his homeland again. So in chapter 31, chapter 31, verse 1, and he heard the words of Laban's son saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which our fathers hath he gotten all this glory. And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. And the Lord said to Jacob, return unto the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock, and said unto him, I see your father's countenance, that is not toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me. And you know that with all my power I have served your father. And your father had deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God suffered him not to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all this cattle bear speckled. And he said thus, the ringstraight shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ringstraight. Thus God had taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. And it came to pass at the time when the cattle conceived that I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ringstraked and speckled and gristled. And the angel of God spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob, and said, here am I. And he said, lift up now thine eyes and see all the rams which leap upon the cattle are ringstraked and speckled and gristled, and I will send all that Laban doeth unto thee. I am the God of Bethel. And what was important about Bethel? Remember, I told you earlier, what's important about Bethel? Where did Jacob have that encounter with the Lord? Was at Bethel, what he called Bethel at the time. It was called Luz, but he called it Bethel. And the Lord refers to that being Bethel, to meet there with the Lord. But the point is that God everything was in control by God for Jacob. No matter what was going on in Jacob's life, even for the 20 years he was there, taking place, all that's taking place, God is in control, and now God is having him go back to the land. There's time to go back. If you remember, 28, the Lord had said to him in verse 15, and behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken of thee. He said he would bring him back to that land. So now, after 20 years, it's time for him to go back to the land. Now, a host of angels in chapter 32, when he goes back, In chapter 32, verses 1 through 2, you see here, and Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw that he said, this is God's host, and he called the name of that place Mahanaim, if I say it right. I think this is to encourage him. To see these angels was to encourage him that the Lord's with him. The Lord has a host that's with him, taking care of him. Because let me ask you this question. With Jacob going back, what was his fear? What is it? His brother. He still, after 20 years, he doesn't know how his brother is going to respond to him. And how much, his brother may be still hating him after 20 years. And so that's just fear in the back of his mind, like, what's going to happen when I see Esau? And that bothered him. That weighed on him. The wrestling of the angel, chapter 32, go down there in verse 24. So move on down a little bit further. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince thou hast power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore is it that thou doest ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. At this point is where what happens here. His name is changed. His name is changed, and also I think it says here, verse 30, he's halted in his thigh. It says, and he passed over Peniel, the sun rose over him, and he halted upon his thigh. And therefore the children of Israel eat not the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh. Unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew, that shrank. So after that point, pretty well Jacob was a little bit, walking with a limp, I would say, at that point. But the key thing, his name was changed to Israel at this time.
He was finally humbled and surrendered to God.
Pardon?
He was finally humbled and surrendered to God.
Yeah. He was humbled in meeting God. And here his brother, of course, in chapter 33, he meets his brother. In verses 1 through 17. I'm not going to read all of that, but 1 through 17 here in chapter 33. But in verse 4, and Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children, and said unto, who are those with thee? And he said, the children which God hath granted, graciously given thy servant. Then the handmaids came near, and they and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Leah also with her children came near and bowed themselves, and came after Joseph near, and Rachel, and they bowed themselves. And he said, what meanest thou by all this drove which I met? And he said, these are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep thou hast unto thyself. I know I skipped over this. But Jacob, in trying to meet Esau, he did what with his family and his handmaids and his children? He separated them. And he separated in case Esau was going to be mean. I guess bottom line is, get the one at the front, And he stayed towards the back because he wanted to protect especially Rachel. I mean, he was greatly in love with Rachel. And of course with Jacob, her son. Let's say Joseph, very much in love. But what I'm saying is that he put them, okay, if Esau, my brother's going to be mad, let him be mad with them first, and I'll give him possessions and all that. But what did Esau say? I don't need anything. I have enough. But I think it's key about Esau is that his demeanor in meeting his brother. How did he meet his brother? He welcomed him. He welcomed him. He didn't say, all my soldiers, all my army guys, all my guys, let's go just attack him. Let's get rid of him. Let's get my brother. He did not. Because he said in verse 4, and Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. That had to be such a relief to him. to have his own brother to be accepting of him after all these years. Because all he could think of, hey, after all these years, he could be really, really still mad at me what took place. So the return. A couple of things about the return is also these things I pulled out here to see this. I think they're not all pleasant, of course, of here to see, but I kind of summarize these for you. When Jacob returned to experience these sorrows and blessings that took place, some sorrows and blessings that took place in his life. Not everything is, once you're saved, not everything is just great, I guess you want to say. It's like easygoing, everything's okay, I'm blessed, and no harm can happen. It's not that way, is it? Just because you're saved doesn't mean we're immune to things that are taking place around us. The sad part is his daughter was assaulted by the prince of Shechem. And with that came the revenge of two of his sons. Two of his sons took it upon themselves to revenge their sister by slaying the men of Shechem. The revenge, as you see here. Simeon and Levi took it upon themselves to do this, to kill all the men. And then the death of Deborah, Rachel's nurse in Bethel. And the next one here is the Lord's reassurance here in chapter 35. Let's go to chapter 35, verses 9, if you would, please. Chapter 35, verse 9. Let me back at the verse 6. So Jacob came to Luz, which is in the land of Canaan, which is Bethel, he and all the people that were with him. And he built there an altar and called the place El Bethel, because there God appeared unto him when he fled from the face of his brother. But Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried beneath Bethel under an oak. And the name of it was called Alan Bakuth. And God appeared unto Jacob, and again, when he came unto Pandaram, and blessed him. And God said unto him, Thy name is Jacob. Thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name. And he called his name Israel. And God said unto him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply, and a nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. And the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, and to thee I will give it. To thee I will give it, and to thy seed after thee will I give the land. And God went up from him in the place where he talked with him. And Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, even a pillar of stone. And he poured a drink offering thereon, and he poured oil thereon. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spake with him, Bethel. He calls it Bethel here. Very important to him. Of course, you didn't have the birth of Benjamin and the death of Rachel in chapter 35, verse 16. And they journeyed from Bethel, and there was but a little way came to Ephrath. And Rachel travailed, and she had hard labor. And it came to pass, when she was in hard labor, that the midwife said unto her, Fear not, thou shalt have this son also. And it came to pass, as her soul was in departing, for she died, that she called his name Benoah, and his father named him Benjamin. And Rachel died and was buried in the way of Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. And Jacob set a pillar upon her grave, and in the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this, that is the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day. And Israel journeyed. Now you notice what's happening here. It says Israel journeyed. Remember, his name was changed from Jacob, now it's turned over to Israel. You know, that had to be kind of devastating to him. I mean, losing a spouse, and especially the one, I hate to say he loved the most, which was Rachel, the one he loved the most, and the death of her. But she had given birth to another son. The next point is the meeting of his father in chapter 35, verse 27. And Jacob came unto Isaac his father, unto Mamre, unto the city of Arba, which is in Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac sojourned. And the days of Isaac were 104 years, and Isaac gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people, being old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him there. You think about that, with Jacob having to go to Haran, like he did, being gone for 20 years, now coming back, he's finally getting a chance to see his father. We don't know how long after that he saw his father. got to see him again. And then, of course, his father died, and him and his brother together helped bury him, of course. So moving on here, this point here I thought was interesting. Though the book of Genesis records the lives of several great men, none is described more completely than Joseph. We're going to talk about Joseph here. Now, Joseph here is going to be a kind of a whirlwind if I can get through it. It's fast enough. That's how it works through this. But because he was one of the youngest sons of Jacob, the firstborn by Rachel, he was the favorite of his father. We all know that. Why was he so? How did, if you know already, you probably do, how was he saw as the favorite of all the sons? How has it stood out? Something you probably already know. You've heard it when you were little. The coat of many colors was given to him. And he was not the youngest son. I mean, he was not the oldest son. The oldest was Reuben, of course, was not the oldest one. But here he was given this coat of many colors. As you see this last bullet here, in the course of his life, Joseph was an honored son, a common slave, a trusted prisoner, and a leading minister in the government of Egypt. To think about that, how he progressed through this. A lot of us, we know the story. We've read this. I'm not going to read all the parts of the story, but we've read this part of the story about Joseph, his life, being put in as a slave and all that. This is in the handout for you, just so you have a relation of understanding Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph here, the relations of this and their time spans. That's what that's for. Here's also the layout here. I want you to see here in this real quickly. His brothers, most of the children were born in Haran, except for Benjamin. Benjamin was not born there. He was born later after he got back to the land, the promised land there. So moving on, the dreamer, Joseph the dreamer, chapter 37. Chapter 37, and Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Belial, with the sons of Zephra and his father's wives, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto him, I pray you, this dream which I dreamed you. I chuckle about this is because he already knows his situation with his brothers, that they don't like him. And yet he still tells them this dream that he's had. He cannot hide this dream that he had because he knows it's from the Lord, this dream that he had. You know, you would think, I ain't going to tell you guys anything. But he didn't. He told them this dream so they, hopefully they would understand something. But just made them what? Made them more mad that you're going to see here. But he tells them this dream. Behold, he said in verse 7, behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood around about and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us, or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. That wasn't enough. He tells them another dream he had, of course. The other dream is, and he dreamed yet another dream and told it his brethren and said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him and said unto him, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee in the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. He's telling the truth. He's telling them the truth, and they don't like the truth. His dreams, there's two dreams he's had, of course, as you saw here. The dream about the sheaves and the dream about the sun, moon, and the stars. These are prophetic dreams, really, that's going to take place. It looks at the setting like right now, how's this going to take place? Even the brothers are like, you got to be kidding us. How's this ever going to take place? Of course, they hate him so bad. Someone wanted to kill him, of course. And as you saw here, when he went to go check on his brethren, in verse 14, he said unto him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be his father sins, and be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron and went to Shechem. So he goes, looks for them. He finally finds them. And what is their attitude about when they see him coming? Going to kill him. In verse 20. Well, let's go to verse 18. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. To slay their own brother. And they said one to another, behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now and therefore, and let us slay him and cast him into some pit, and we will say, come, some evil beast hath devoured him, and shall see what we become of his dreams. Because he is saved by his other brothers, saved. And so he winds up being sold as a slave. Sold off to be a slave, to go to Egypt, of course. If you see that last bullet down here, quotes from the scriptures, chapter 39, verse 2, parallel to the story is the sinful purpose of the brethren, is the story of the gracious purposes of God. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. The Lord was always with Joseph, with all of this taking place. Yes.
And God chose Joseph to bring Israel to Egypt to kind of humble Israel and show her that she couldn't do anything without God.
Right.
You know, the importance of God. And, he used all of that, all bad stuff,
And that's what we're finding out as we go through this. You see all the things that are happening in Joseph's lives as well takes place. How God brings us all together and using this. You have this handout. It's also a handout that gives you a little bit of timeline here, but I'm skipping over that for you. So he becomes a prisoner. And while he's a prisoner there, he's a trusted prisoner. And he's also trusted, but he also gets to go into Potiphar's house in chapter 39. I'm going to jump over to 39, verse 39. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. While he's in the house of the Potiphar, and he's kind of like the head there. Because in verse 3, and his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass at the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessings of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and all in his field. Interesting that what was God's promise to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob and to descendants? I will bless them that bless thee. And was he not blessed being promoted to the position he was? And God, in his hand, in Joseph's hand, all he did, he was being blessed. He was blessing what? He was blessing the house of Potiphar as well, and what was going on. You think about that. But while he's in there, of course, Potiphar's wife had her eye on him, this young guy, 17, 18 years old. I don't know, he probably might be 18 by this time. I don't know how old he is at this time, but he was 17, was taken to slavery. But she has her eye on him and tried to pursue him. It says daily, constantly trying to pursue him. And of course, he was trying to be doing what's right and knowing what's right and wrong and doing that, of course. And of course, when she pursued him and set the setting up, he fled from her. And that's the way to do, to flee from the sin, to get away from it. And that's what he did. And in doing so, what happened to him? He was put in prison where he had to go. But the Lord, the last thing here, the Lord, this is my statements here. The incident of Potiphar's wife pursuing Joseph and his refusal caused him to be wrongly accused and thrown into prison. His path to leadership in Egypt was through the gates, prison gates, for something he did not do. For something he did not do, he was put in prison, of course. The Lord used this event. So while he's in prison, he's there, in captivity for 13 years. You'll see this as we go, because he's 30 when he gets promoted. But the verse, Hebrews 10:36, for ye have need of patience. After that ye have done the will of God, you might receive the promise. Let me ask you this. Why he was in prison, why he'd been sold by his brothers, How do you think he was as a young man, 17 years old, knowing you were sold by your brothers to be a slave, and how he was put into his house, and he advanced, he did very well, but then he was pursued, and he ran away, and got away, and he's put in prison. How do you think he's feeling all this? How would you respond to all this? Discouraged? Wouldn't he be kind of discouraged sometimes? But he still had his trust in the Lord. I think in all of this, he was still trusting the Lord in everything that was going on. All of this. So while he's in prison, he gets two famous prisoners with him. The chief butler and the chief baker. And both of them have a dream, and he gets to interpret their dreams. So interesting, when he interprets their dreams, who gets the best dream first? There's 2 dreams given. So he interprets the dreams, and you'll see the dreams here in chapter 39. Let's see. Chapter 40. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against 2 of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward and all that. So go down to verse 5. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to his interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them, and he looked on them, and he said, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his Lord's house, saying, wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto him, we have dreamed a dream. I'm going to jump down here to verse 9. And the chief butler told him his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was, though it budded and it blossomed and shoot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes, and Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand, and Joseph said unto him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days, and yet wherein 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head and restore thee unto thy place. And thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner when thou wast his butler. Quickly, and I'm trying to zip through, I'm looking at my clock here, trying to zip through everything. The first dream was for who? The butler. And was it a good dream? To have good outcome, right? So the next dream was the baker. The baker said, hey, I had a dream. And he expressed his dream. So when his dream comes out, what? Not too good. The outcome is not good here, okay? And when the baker saw, and it said in verse 16, and when the baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also had my dream. And behold, I had 3 white baskets. I'm going to read the whole dream here. But he finds out, oh, he's going to be lifted up all right. His head, going to lose his head on this one. It wasn't good for him. Can you imagine that? Both of these guys dreaming dreams, and both of them thinking, I can see the butler say, hey, this is good. This sounds good. The baker said, no, that didn't sound too good in 3 days. Of course, we know what happened to them. They were out. The baker lost his head, and wasn't good. But what happened also was that the butler did what? We all have this tendency. We seem like we have a problem with this. We forgot. He forgot to tell anybody what had taken place. For 2 more years, Joseph's in the prison until Pharaoh has a dream and needs help for the dream. And then all of a sudden the butler says, oh, I think I know somebody who can help you on this one. And they go get Joseph out of the prison and bring him out, and he tells the dream. He explains the dream. And I'm not going to be able to get done with this lesson. I see that now. I got too many things more to go here. We're not going to get there. It's going to be another one of these. I'm going to have to split this lesson up again. Because I'm looking at the clock. We're running out of time. The first bell is going to ring over here in a second. I'm going to stop right here. I'll redesign this lesson so I can pick up on the end of this next week. It's the only way I can get through it. Because I hate rushing through everything for you. Anybody have any comments, any questions before the first bell rings here? I'm trying to get done by the first bell. That's my goal in life in the Sunday school classroom. Anybody, anything? Hopefully I'm not going too fast and you're thinking, John, you're going too fast. I can't keep up with you. And I'm not learning anything. But we'll work it out. Anybody, anything? Okay? All right, let's go, Lord, in prayer, and we'll get started.